here's a look at how to attack the draft if you've been assigned one of the middle picks in a 12-team PPR scoring league. Round 1. Some fantasy managers might be surprised to see Davante Adams as a top-ranked wideout on my board, but that's exactly where he belongs. Though he finished as the second best fantasy receiver in 2018, Adams averaged the most fantasy points per game at 22. It was due in large to his consistency, as he posted 81 yards and/or a touchdown in all 15 he played. Aaron Rodgers has also expressed a desire to get the ball to Adams even more, if that's possible. DeAndre Hopkins is a worthy selection in this range, as is Ezekiel Elliott if you're willing to take on a risk associated with his holdout. Others to consider: Nick Chubb. Round 2. We discussed Dalvin Cook in depth as one of the 7 players who will lead you to a fantasy title in 2019. Once he was back in the lineup for good last year, Cook was a top 10 fantasy back from week 9 on as the Vikings shifted to a run-heavy approach. And, based on the additions they've made on the offensive line, combined with the hiring of offensive advisor Gary Kubiak, all signs point to the run-first philosophy continuing for this season. Durability is still a question mark given that Cook's only appeared in 15 of a possible 32 games in his career, so we'll be looking for a potential handcuff in the later rounds. Others to consider: Travis Kelce, Joe Mixon, Mike Evans. Round 3. If Aaron Jones, Kerryon Johnson, and Marlon Mack fall into this range, I wouldn't think twice about picking them here. Devonta Freeman comes with some red flags because he's ended each of the last 2 seasons on injured reserve, leaving many to question whether he's breaking down. But, by all accounts, the 27-year-old is completely recovered from his ailments. And, to look at it another way, Freeman has suited up for 14 games or more in 4 of his 5 NFL campaigns. The front office's effort to bolster the offensive line, along with the severe lack of competition in the Falcons' backfield, gives Freeman RB1 upside in the 3rd round. Others to consider: T.Y. Hilton and Melvin Gordon. Round 4. Mark Ingram has received far too little hype from the fantasy community, though perhaps that will change after his preseason debut with the Ravens this week. Ingram is the best back Baltimore's had in a while, and with the volume he'll see in this run first, run second, run third attack, we can project a big year from the former Saint. Scooping up Ingram or Chris Carson in the 4th round, especially to serve as our flex, is a league-winning move. Others to consider: Chris Carson, Robert Woods, Brandon Cooks. Round 5. In the first article of this series, we chose Curtis Samuel in the 8th round, and he remains the better value pick between the Panthers' 2 breakout receivers. On the other hand, DJ Moore is a likelier to deliver a top 24 season. When his playing time increased down the stretch, Moore was the WR23 in PPR leagues over the final 7 weeks of his rookie campaign, and that was with Cam Newton dealing with a shoulder issue and eventually missing a couple of games. A healthy Newton will unlock Moore's upside and make him one of the newest fantasy stars in 2019. Others to consider: Tyler Boyd, Tevin Coleman, and O.J. Howard. Round 6. It was a tough decision to pass on Howard, who's one of my favorite tight end targets. But knowing that I could get one of Evan Engram, Hunter Henry, or Jared Cook a round later led me to select Moore. There are a ton of quality options available at this stage of the 6th round, but Cook is the last tight on my board who I feel confident in as a weekly difference maker. In a Saints offense that lacks reliable number 2 receiver, Cook will essentially play that role, similar to how Eric Ebron stepped up to the Colts' pass-catching core last season. The result could be a similarly impressive double-digit touchdown season. Others to consider: Robbie Anderson, Miles Sanders, Alshon Jeffrey. Round 7. Everyone is jumping off the Dante Pettis bandwagon, causing his ADP to dip a round or so. Take advantage. Kyle Shanahan's recent tough love approach with Pettis has been an attempt to motivate the talented young wideout. It's possible Pettis doesn't respond to the tactic and never reaches his ceiling as a pro, but at worst, he'll be a big play threat in a productive offense. In the 7th, we can roll the dice on Pettis' upside while assuming very little risk. Others to consider: Will Fuller, Rashad Penny, Latavius Murray. Round 8. Waiting on a quarterback is the way to go unless you see a value opportunity pop up when you're on the clock. Carson Wentz ADP has begun to rise, but Cam Newton can still be selected in the 8th and sometimes even as early as the 9th round. Last year, Newton really took Norv Turner's offense and was the QB3 in fantasy before a shoulder issue derailed him in Week 14. With an outstanding young supporting cast, Newton is primed for another strong season. We also get to stack him with more in our starting lineup. Others to consider: Sammy Watkins, Curtis Samuel, D.D. Westbrook. Round 9. With quarterback and tight end secured, we can zero in on the high upside of running backs and receivers. It's tempting to go receiver here, but the position is very deep, which should allow us to address it in the next few rounds. Instead, we'll grab James Conner's immediate backup, Jalen Samuels, who may actually carve out a regular role as a pass catcher in the Steelers' backfield. Samuels showed last year that he's capable of producing RB1 numbers when given starter snaps, so we'll place him on our bench as a potential league-winning lottery ticket in the event that Conner is sidelined again. Others to consider: Corey Davis, Emmanuel Sanders, Duke Johnson. Round 10. Given the concerns around Pettis' practice performances, we need to find a couple of bench receivers who could slide in as fantasy starters if need be. We'll take our second straight Steeler. This time, it's Donte Moncrief, who's made his way onto many of my rosters as the new number 2 receiver in Pittsburgh. With Juju Smith-Schuster transitioning to the top option, Moncrief has the inside track to start alongside him and help replace some of the 168 targets left behind by Antonio Brown. Others to consider: Deshaun Jackson, Damian Harris, Devin Singletary. Round 11. Anthony Miller has been forgotten or discarded by many in the fantasy community in favor of more overt breakout candidates, even though he's coming off a rookie season where he scored 7 touchdowns while playing through a shoulder injury suffered in Week 3. An ankle sprain has sidelined him for the preseason, which will keep him and his ADP in check until he reminds everyone what he's capable of and when the real games begin in September. Miller's a WR3/flex going off the board as a WR52. Others to consider: Matt Breida, Lamar Jackson, John Brown. Round 12. Alexander Mattison won't make it to the 12th round in many drafts, but his ADP places him right in that range. Mike Boone has flashed game-breaking skills in each of the last 2 preseasons, but if the Vikings believed in him as the backup, they wouldn't have invested a 3rd-round pick in Mattison during April's drafts. As we mentioned when we drafted Cook in the 2nd round, Minnesota has built their new approach around the run game, and if Cook misses time for the 3rd straight year, Mattison will vault into the weekly RB2 conversation. Others to consider: Justice Hill, Josh Gordon, Justin Jackson. Later rounds. The truth is, after the 10th round or so, you no longer need to pay close attention to the ADPs. You should be focused on filling out your bench with as many high upside players as possible, with your sights set on running backs and receivers. Quarterbacks or tight ends can always be streamed or acquired by trading a bench player. Save your final 2 picks for a defense and a kicker.